My name is Choi, and I serve as the president of the UM system and the chancellor of the Mizzou campus. And today I want to share a little bit of background about my story. But my story would not be complete without talking about my parents. My parents, Tony and Kathleen Choi, were born in Korea. When they were born in the late 1930s, Korea was one country. There was no North, there was no South Korea. It was one country that was under the occupation of the Japanese. On the day that the Japanese surrendered aboard the USS Missouri was the day that Korea received its independence. But soon after receiving independence from Japanese colonial rule, the country was divided into North and South along the 38th parallel. My father was born in now what is known as North Korea, and my mother was born in what is now known as South Korea. They shared with me the stories of the suffering that they had growing up. They told me stories of hardship, including not having enough to eat or feeling cold without proper shoes and proper clothing. They also instilled in me the value of respect and also resilience, and always showing kindness to others. My mother was born to a family of 8 children. She was the second eldest. She had an older brother, 2 younger brothers, and remaining sisters. Her father was a small businessman who purchased electronics, refurbished them, and sold them. He didn't make much money, but they had a happy childhood as they remember it, until the Korean War occurred. And during the Korean War, the entire family had to evacuate from their home in South Korea and make their way all the way south to the coast by foot. And she remembers her father tying a rope around the waist of each of the children so that they can ensure that they will make it through as a family for each day's journey. After the Korean War, they went back to their village, which was devastated because of the bombings, but they stayed together as a family and worked hard to support each other. My mother attended elementary school like all of the other children, but by the time that she was about to go to middle school, her father told her, "Unlike your brother, I don't have the funds available to support you like I did for him." So she stayed home from the age of 13 until she was 20 years old. During that period, her 2 younger brothers were able to attend school. She would do the housework and all the other things that a young girl would do with her mother to take care of a family of 10 people. But she also spent time to study from the books that her brothers brought home, by candlelight, whatever she could to learn more. During that period, she learned from her older brother that there were some missionaries coming to a larger town near her hometown in Daegu. And the missionaries were going to establish support for those who are in need, especially orphans and also young girls who want to advance their education. And she learned about a scholarship program for a residential nursing school. And so she decided that she's going to try out, but she needed to have a middle school certificate or a degree, which she didn't have. She talked to her mother. Her mother told her that ever since she was a young girl, my mother was a young girl, she'd been saving some money for a dowry, eventually when my mother would be married. And with that money, she wanted to buy a sewing machine for my mother. My mother asked her if she could take that money and try to find some way of getting a middle school certificate. So she took the money, visited the local middle school, talked to the principal, and convinced him to teach her for the next 6 months. And after learning from him, she was able to get the certificate, and she studied very hard for that examination to get into the nursing school. And this nursing school provided residential experiences and was free of charge for both the residents, dining, as well as the tuition. And so it attracted a lot of competition from all over the country. So she worked very hard, studied, and eventually when she took the test, she learned that she got first place. And she was able to complete her nursing education from that point on. And while she was going to school, she also helped teach her younger sisters. The 4 younger sisters all relied on her, and 3 of them were also able to get a nursing degree through similar fashion. In our family album at my mother's home, there is a picture of a woman, an American woman, wearing a Korean traditional dress sitting by a Christmas tree. And I would frequently ask my mother, who is this person? And she would tell me that she was one of the nursing teachers that she met during the period right after the Korean War. And that person's name is Elizabeth Klippenstein. And Elizabeth Klippenstein, together with her husband, Donald Klippenstein, made the decision to go to South Korea in 1955. And they stayed there for 3 years as part of the Mennonite Central Committee to help feed and take care of orphans and young girls that did not have opportunity. And the Klippensteins were very supportive of my mother during that period. And that's why my mother had that picture in her album. And I talked to her about that picture again in 2016 when we were visiting South Korea as a family. And, I decided at that point to try to find out where Mrs. Klippenstein is. And through the marvels of the internet, I was able to locate a Mrs. Klippenstein who lived in Goshen, Indiana. I called her and shared with her that I'm the son of one of her former students from South Korea. And she was very excited to hear from me. And we made an arrangement for my mother to go visit her. So in December 2016, I drove my mother from Chicago 2 hours east to Goshen, Indiana, to meet Mrs. Klippenstein. And Mrs. Klippenstein lives in a Mennonite community. We learned that her husband passed about 2 years earlier. And she also had with her a Korean daughter that she adopted right after the Korean War. And on her dining room table, she laid out pictures from her period in South Korea. And she shared her story about why she wanted to go to South Korea, of all places. She had a comfortable life as a nurse. Her husband was a computer scientist working for a large corporation. But for 3 years, they decided to give all of that up and move to South Korea to mentor and support people like my mother. And with those pictures, it brought back memories to my mother because some of those pictures my mother didn't know existed. And through those pictures and the stories that she shared, we learned about the kindness of Americans, the kindness of people like Mrs. Klippenstein and Mr. Klippenstein, who made a difference to an individual like me. When I go back and think about the fact that we were able to come to the United States in 1973 only because my mother had a nursing degree and there was a nursing shortage in the United States, that we were able to receive permanent residency to come to the United States. I can say that I owe my life to the kindness of people like Elizabeth Klippenstein. That story is important because it has a link to how we came to the United States. I come from a family of 4 children. I'm the eldest, and I have 3 younger sisters. Korea, soon after World War II and the Korean War, was one of the poorest countries in the world. In fact, after World War II and the Korean War, it was the second poorest country based on GDP. And when I was born in 1964, Korea was still a developing country that relied heavily on export. And also the opportunities for a person who doesn't come from privilege, for a person without the connection, was going to be very limited. So my parents decided to give up their lives in Korea to come to the United States in 1973 with 4 young children. I was 9 at the time. And they decided that they would give it a try. They didn't speak English. They didn't have a job offer, but they have family. In 1973, my father's younger brother operated a Taekwondo studio in Akron, Ohio, and he sponsored our family to come to the United States. And after arriving, they quickly realized that without a degree from the United States, as well as the ability to speak English, job opportunities were very limited. But we greatly enjoyed the friendships that we developed, the support from people of Akron, Ohio. But after a few months of trying to find work, my parents decided that they have to do something else, something different. And they decided, because of my father's connection to his friends, Korean friends who are operating Taekwondo studios across the Midwest, that he would give a try at making Taekwondo uniforms. They have no experience in sewing, but they bought a sewing machine, and that's the link to my mother's sewing machine that she was going to get as part of her dowry. And they began making uniforms, one at a time, from the kitchen. Then it got a little bit bigger with customer base growing. And after about 2 years, they decided that they have to go to a bigger market with more Taekwondo studios, as well as more opportunities to get equipment and the supplies. So in 1975, we moved to Chicago. And I consider Chicago to be my hometown. And my father worked hard, as well as my mother. In fact, my father had a job during the day at a company that manufactured stress strain measurements. And my mother worked during the day and at night, making the uniforms that my father would cut the material for. But all of the children were involved, one way or the other. And during the summer, the sewing machines will be in the garage. But in the winter, when it got cold, they would be moved into the kitchen. Little by little, the company started growing. And that company that began in 1973 is still operating in Chicago with my 3 younger sisters serving as managers of that company. They make Taekwondo uniforms to chef's wear, to meat packers' frock, and all types of private labeling. They employ local residents, and they treat their employees well. During that period when this business was growing in the early 80s, there was a lot of concern among those who care about labor and laborers, about sweatshops being operated. And these sweatshops typically would be sewing machine plants. So when he moved into a larger facility, the first thing that he did was to ensure that there was air conditioning throughout the building. He really cared about his workers. He cared about them as family. Some of those employees still have a good relationship with our family. I also recall a story back in 1973-74, being a 9-year-old boy, attending school, and enjoying the friendships that I've been making. And I talked about the opportunity to get free or discounted lunch. And I shared that with my father. And he taught me something very important. He asked me, what contributions have you made to deserve a benefit like that? I didn't have an answer. Then he asked, what contributions do you think I made to get a benefit like that? We have not provided the investment into this country to reap those benefits. And that's a lesson that I carry on today, that there has to be personal responsibility and that hard work is important. Growing up in Chicago was very interesting. Chicago was not like Akron, Ohio. It was tougher. It was colder. And it was a place where each one of us had to prove ourselves. And when I was in middle school, I participated in a number of activities, including chess, and also learning how to play the piano. I remember at the school, which was called Trumbull School, in a neighborhood called Andersonville in Chicago, that had a piano teacher, but no piano. So we would actually practice the piano by having a cardboard piano. And as I would play the keys, the teacher would sound out the sound. Now, it wasn't ideal, but I was able to learn something about music and something about learning the keys. During that period, I remember that we didn't have very much, but we were always well fed. The most exciting day was when my father was able to buy a brand new Buick LeSabre wagon. I also learned a lesson that during that period when my father was buying the car. I was with him when we visited Lauren Buick. The car that we purchased was in the showroom. And there was a gentleman that actually drove the vehicle out of the showroom into the street for us, who worked at Lauren Buick. But as he was trying to maneuver out of the showroom, he actually damaged the car on the side. Now, normally, I would have expected an owner of a new car to be very upset. But my father went to the gentleman and said, "Don't worry about it." And went to the manager and said, "Just fix it, but don't do anything that is a reprimand to the driver." And I also saw in that where my father's heart was. And I learned a great lesson from that experience. From Andersonville, we moved to the far north side of Chicago, where I attended Mather High School. And during high school, I participated in a number of activities. I participated in the track team. I played on the football team. I was also part of the National Honor Society. Even though I was 5'6" and only 145 pounds, I was able to play inside linebacker on the football team. That tells you a lot about our football team. We weren't very big. In fact, I was probably the smallest and probably the slowest, but I was able to identify plays as they were happening and try to anticipate. I wasn't very good, but I enjoyed playing football. And in my senior year, I was made co-captain of the football team. And I was so proud. Never thought that I'd play football, being the size that I was, but also the faith that my teammates had in me to select me for that position. But beyond that, I made so many close friendships with the teachers. And in my culture from South Korea, teachers are held at the highest esteem because of the work they do in not only expanding the horizon for the mind of the young person, but also serving as a mentor. And whether it's Mrs. Hooks, who was my math teacher, Mrs. Schlensky, who was my English teacher, I learned a great deal from all of them. And in high school, I decided that I would pursue engineering. Not because I knew anything about engineering, but I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I did not want to be a medical doctor. And those professions are highly sought after by Korean parents and therefore Korean children. So I attended the University of Illinois to pursue an engineering degree. Coming from a Chicago high school into the University of Illinois was a bit of a shock. While I did well at my high school in Chicago, I was now competing with students that had far more capability in their analytical capabilities as well as the number of courses that they took in AP. But I knew that I wanted to succeed. So for the next 4 years, I worked hard. In fact, the first time that I was in the basketball arena was to receive my degree from the Dean of Engineering. I look back at that time and ask myself, Would I have done things differently? Perhaps, but I did not want to walk into a interview room and have to explain why my record wasn't at the level that I expected. I knew that the job of a student was to study, to learn, to expand the mind. And that's why whenever I can, I talk to students about the importance of studies first and then extracurricular activities. But the business at hand is so critical. After my studies at the University of Illinois, I applied to a number of graduate schools. And I decided in the end that I was going to attend Princeton University. Not because I knew anything about Princeton, other than the first president of South Korea receiving his degree from Princeton, and also knowing that Princeton was different than the University of Illinois. It was a small, private university. And I found a wonderful mentor named Fred Dreyer, and he's still my mentor after 28 years since my degree from Princeton. He shared with me what I needed to learn as a researcher, as a scientist, as an engineer. And during that period, I also learned a great deal from my fellow students. And those students have gone on to incredible careers. Princeton was a place where excellence was expected in everything that we do, in our approach, in our ability to share respect with one another, as well as excellence in scholarship. And during that period, I performed research on sooting droplet combustion and the ability for us to make measurements of soot production that comes from burning small droplets gave us an insight on emission control, as well as increasing efficiencies in practical combustors. As part of that project, we performed our experiments in what is known as zero gravity facilities. So together with my colleagues, I was able to fly in one of those airplanes that simulates zero gravity, and they call it the Vomit Comet. And together with my fellow students, we were able to do experiments that prepared our approach for eventual performance in the International Space Station. And after graduating, I performed a postdoc at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. And it is there that I met my wife, Suzanne Choi. She worked at a law firm, and we met on a blind date, and about 9 months later, we were married. And 2 months after getting married, I received my first academic position at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It is a university that is not very old, only about 65 years old, but it's now grown to one of the largest medical schools, as well as largest public research university in an urban setting. I remember that many of the students who attended UIC were students who come from first-generation college families, students who come from underrepresented minority families, as well as students who come from families that are in the Pell-eligible categories. And I remember how hard they worked, not only in their schoolwork, but also their first and second jobs that they held simultaneously while going to school. So I remember asking myself, what is your approach to becoming a professor? It's going to be giving back to the students just as much as they put in to their schoolwork. And so I took my teaching very seriously. I had an open door office policy where any student can walk in, talk to me about not only the classwork, but also what's going on in their lives, as well as professional advice that they needed. I remember in my second year, as part of my advising of students, a student walked in and sat on a chair. And as the student was coming in, I was getting my materials ready to see what classes he had taken and what classes he needs to take. And out of the corner of my eye, as I'm looking at the material, the student who was now sitting in one of the chairs, began taking off his shoes and then taken off his socks. And then I noticed that he was grabbing a pen using his toes and using it to sign the advising sheet. And I noticed that the student had very short arms. And the student was able to come to the university on his own for the advising and attend the university for his degree. So we had a conversation. I asked him, how do you do it? First of all, how do you come to the university? Does someone take you? He said, no. I have my car outfitted so that I can drive with my knees. When I saw that, I saw his resilience. I felt his commitment to learning. And if there was ever a time where I doubted why I spent more time on teaching, that moment taught me that I knew that I was doing the right thing. And at a university, even like the one at the University of Missouri, where it is an AAU, public research university, teaching must come first. And I share this with faculty members and ask them, what is your proudest moment, especially as they're nearing retirement? And they'll say, it's when I get a nice note from a student that I had 20, 30 years ago that said that I made a difference in their life and that the lessons that they learned in my class during the conversations about mentoring have shaped them and their career. And I know that many faculty members want to pursue research, but pursuing research at a university without a commitment to teaching, to excellent teaching, is only half of the equation. And I kid with them that all of the citations that they have on their articles or their journal articles are not going to come back 20, 30 years later, or when the faculty member is about to retire, to thank them for the influence that he or she has had on their careers. From mentorships and the opportunities that I've had through incredible people that I've met throughout my life, I've been able to explore other opportunities at academic institutions. And the person that has made a tremendous impact on my professional life is Selçuk Guçeri. Selçuk Guçeri was the department chair at the University of Illinois Chicago who hired me. And he had an opportunity to move to Drexel University as dean. And after about a year of constant calls from him asking me to move to Drexel University, I decided that I would give it a try. And during that period, I learned so much from Selçuk Guçeri. Selçuk Guçeri is the most compassionate and generous person that I've met. A person who would always reflect the glory to others, reflect the glory with junior partners that he's working with, and always caring about their professional and personal development. And after spending about 7 years at Drexel University, an opportunity came up at University of Connecticut, and that was to become the Dean of Engineering. And this is where I would demonstrate, without the support from a mentor who was above me as dean, to do the things that I believe are important in higher education. And at University of Connecticut, I worked with talented faculty and students to transform a sleepy college into what is now a very strong college of engineering. And during that process, I am very proud to have worked with colleagues to increase enrollment significantly and take the research in 2008 from about 13 million to the time that I had left in 2016 to over $40 million. And as part of that process, we worked closely with the state as well as industry partners in Connecticut to develop important programs, including Next Generation Connecticut, which was a $1.7 billion investment to improve the University of Connecticut's reputation and contribute to economic development. And just like at Drexel University before and UIC before then, I thought that I was going to retire. I remember on November 9th, 2015, I was sitting on my desk in Gully Hall in Connecticut, watching the news come out about the events at the University of Missouri, first with the resignation of President Tim Wolf, followed later by the resignation of Chancellor Bowen Lofton. And I remember thinking to myself, Missouri was going through and will go through some challenging periods. And I guess at that time, I did not know how challenging those periods would be. But we now know, looking back 5 years from those events, the University of Missouri suffered significantly, financially as well as reputationally, not from the protests, but the lack of leadership, as well as not being able to manage the aftermath of the resignations of the two senior leaders. When the opportunity for president of the University of Missouri System came up, I didn't naturally think that I would be the right fit. First of all, I didn't have the experience of being a campus leader, like a chancellor at a campus or a president of a campus. But I decided that I'm going to give it a try, that I believe that my experiences in helping develop programs for student success, research, and engagement and inclusion would be very important. And the University of Missouri System gave me a chance. And I am grateful to the curators and the members of the search committee for allowing me the opportunity to lead the university. And now 3.5 years later, I'm also grateful for the people that I work with, the administrators, faculty, staff, students, Missourians, as well as the state legislature and the governor's office, for believing in this university and the people that we serve. While there is still much work ahead, we've been able to reverse the trend significantly in the downward turn in enrollment. We've been able to increase research and the economic impact that we have in the state. And we are addressing the injustices that occur to people of color, faculty members, students, and staff, especially African American faculty, students, and staff, who need to be included, who need to have a voice, who need to contribute effectively in the university, and all of those opportunities must be provided. We are creating a university where, regardless of one's background, experiences, or perspectives, that individual will be valued. And we need to start by having a greater level of understanding, as some would say, walking in the other person's shoes, to understand their perspectives, and to always begin a relationship with respect. I don't believe that anyone has to earn my respect. I will offer that respect from the first instance. And so through that approach, we want to create a university that is inclusive, diverse, as well as a university that is compassionate. And we're committed to strengthen this university into one of the best AAU public research universities in the country. That would take a great deal of work, but we are aligned with the goals of the faculty, staff, and students, and the aspirations of Missourians to make that happen. So it's my great pleasure to serve as the president of the University of Missouri System and the chancellor of this fine campus.